What is indifference? Etymologically, the word means no difference. A strange and unnatural state in which the lines blur between light and darkness, dusk and dawn, crime and punishment, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. Quoted by Elie Wiesel's speech, The Pearls of Indifference. Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel gave this impassioned speech in the East Room of the White House on April 12, 1999, as part of the Millennium Lecture series hosted by President Bill Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton. In the summer of 1944, a teenager in Hungary, Elie Wiesel, along with his father, mother, and sisters, were deported by the Nazis' Auschwitz extermination camp in occupied Poland. Upon arrival there, Wiesel and his father were selected by SS Dr. Josef Mengele for the slave labor and wound up at the nearby Buna rubber factory. In January 1945, as the Russian army drew near, Wiesel and his father were hurriedly evacuated from Auschwitz by a forced march to Gliwice and via an open train car to Buchwald in Germany, where his father, mother, and young sister eventually died. Wiesel was liberated by American troops in April 1945. After the war, he moved to Paris and became a journalist that later settled in New York. Since 1976, he has been Andrew Mellon's professor in the humanities at Boston University. He has received numerous awards and honors, including the 1986 Nobel Peace Prize and the Presidential Medal of the Freedom. He was also the founding chair of the United States Holocaust Memorial. Wiesel had written over 40 books, including Night, a harrowing chronicle of the Holocaust experience, first published in 1960. First, I'm going to tell you why we chose this speaker and this speech. Then Kathy will talk about the significance of the speech. Next, Sarah will explain and demonstrate the communication concepts Professor Wiesel used to convey his message to the audience. And then last, Candace will conclude why the speaker's ability inspires us. We chose this speaker, Elie Wiesel, because he is a very charismatic, influential, and inspiring speaker. We chose his speech, The Pearls of Indifference, because it is a great historical speech, reminding us of the past, which urges us not to repeat the mistakes that were made in the past. And I am now going to pass it over to Kathy to talk about the significance of this.
Professor Wiesel's speech, The Perils of Indifference, dated April 12, 1999, is a profound message of his experience during the Holocaust and how to persuade the United States to help the people of the world suffering with violent leaders and the injustice of genocide. The significance of his speech is an informative angle which describes his experiences in the Holocaust and persuades us to help unfortunate people suffering around the world. Professor Wiesel's speech informs us of the hideous reign of Adolf Hitler's evil genocide of his family and the Jewish people who suffered unspeakable torture working in the extermination camps of Auschwitz and transferring to Buchenwald, Germany. Professor Wiesel reminds us all of the senseless assassinations over the years, such as Gandhi, the Kennedys, Martin Luther King Jr., Sadat, and many more in the word indifference is a line that blurs between light and darkness and good and evil in a modern world. According to my brother Frank Guglielmino, who told me that our father, who was in the U.S. Army during World War II, experienced the liberation of some of the Holocaust survivors and the corpses piled in a ditch, which tormented his dreams for the rest of his life. Professor Wiesel tells that the sadness he experienced when he found out that 1,000 Jewish people who reached America aboard the ship St. Louis were turned back to Germany and back into concentration camps. Professor Wiesel persuades our government to never forget about the Holocaust and the recent murders, torture, and genocide in these modern days. It encourages all Americans to stand up and help others caught in the despair of homelessness, poverty, and unjustified imprisonment around the world. In an article in World Today, dated 2003, author Dennis Diamond says about Professor Wiesel's experience in the Holocaust, "Those who have not lived through the experience will never know. Those who have will never tell. Not really, not completely." According to an interview with Professor Wiesel and contemporary literary criticism dated 2003, "We must do something morally appropriate with our power by using our military and moral power to stop countries engaged in mass murder." Finally, a couple of lines from the poem entitled "Never Shall I Forget" in Professor Wiesel's book, Night, rewritten in 1982. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Now I will pass to Sarah, who will explain to you the communication concept of the speech.
Ethos, pathos, and logos. Professor Wiesel uses all of these communication techniques to convey his message to his audience. Emotion is the predominant technique used in this speech. Professor Wiesel uses the emotion of countless people suffering and dying in 1940s Germany during the reign of a tyrant. He uses this when he describes the silent prayers of the prisoners in the concentration camps for help from the nations of the world.
If they knew this hope, surely those leaders would have moved heaven and earth to intervene. They would have spoken out with greater outrage and conviction. They would have bombed the railways